Well, this is Bishop Tavis Grant, the National Field Director for the Rainbow Push Coalition, and this is a special presentation called The Verdict and the Victory. As many of you have been watching the several past hours emanating from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the verdict in the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin, guilty on all three counts. It is an incredible moment for those of us who have fought across the country and many places around the world, from civil rights to human rights. This very gripping moment that so many who have died under the same circumstances, their families were not given the benefit of this type of victory and this type of outcome. It is absolutely historic. To give you some context, in the trial for the murder of Emmett Till, the jury came back in 45 minutes or so, and when they asked why they came back in 45 minutes, the foreman of the jury said we would have come back sooner, but we had to take a cigarette break. And so today, from 1955 to 2021, to see what has culminated, to have a African American attorney general, to have an African American special prosecutor, all of this was unprecedented. But what really capped it off was this jury coming back and confirming what every person that saw for over 8 minutes, 9 minutes of George Floyd's murder, captured by a young woman. No more than 12 or so people were on that sidewalk who captured the video of George Floyd's murder. And today, who used to be Officer Derek Chauvin is now a convicted murderer, convicted murderer. And our challenge is to discuss in this platform not just the verdict and the victory, but where do we go from here? And so those of you who are joining us already, I want you to text, tag, or tell somebody. We are showing this live on Facebook, and on YouTube, and I believe on our website. And so I want you to join. I want you to text, tell, tag somebody. You can join in by posting your questions and your comments in the appropriate area. We think it is significant to have this discussion because in just 48 hours, we will lay to rest little young Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. And his family was communicated by us on this week as the founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition joined Reverend Al Sharpton and Mark Morial of the Urban League and many others there in Minneapolis. His family, it is our prayer, will gain some strength and some hope and aspiration that the victory in Minneapolis will be in a year or less the same type of victory in Brooklyn Center. But it's not just there. And so many names: Tamir Rice, Stephon Watts, Rakia Boyd, so many names: Eric Garner, Sean Bell, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor. Where would we be had you had the same will and same desire, same objective that Keith Ellison had in Minnesota? What if that would have been in Louisville, Kentucky, or Jacob Blake Jr. in Kenosha, Wisconsin, or J. Cole, the Cole family in Wauwatosa, and their lawyers with us on tonight. An officer who killed so many people and was able to keep his badge and get a job in another county. And you'll hear a little bit about that tonight. And so many have not had this moment. And we are not to take this moment lightly, but at the same time, we must be very much reminded Devon Gregory in Jacksonville, Florida. We must be very much reminded that this is systematic, it's institutional, and one case doesn't break all of them. And yet there is a template now that this system can work if you have the right people working the system. So those of you watching us on YouTube, Facebook, and on our website, www.bishoptavisgrant2.org, I want you to text somebody, tag somebody, and tell somebody, and become engaged with us as we talk about the verdict and the victory. Joining us is international civil rights, human rights attorney, my beloved sister Kim Motley. I don't know if she's in North Carolina or Milwaukee or someplace on the planet, but she is internationally known and globally recognized for her work. Also is our National Youth Director, Reverend Cameron Barnes, emanating from Chicago, Illinois. And we also have Pastor Kim Pullings of the Live Church in Jacksonville, Florida, who's been working with us in social justice initiatives, whether it be Diamonds Ford or Devon Gregory. I wanted to pull some people together in the inception of this unfolding, who could bring a very unique look and a unique take on today's developments. Attorney Motley, give me a lawyer's perspective. I'm not a lawyer. I just know how to spell the word, but you actually are like a real lawyer. Give us some perspective and some insight on what you saw in today's verdict.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bishop Grant, for having me on your show, and I'm honored to be here with your other special guests today. What we saw today was what should happen with a lot of unfortunate deaths that happened at the hands of police. That a police officer was charged with proper crimes for being involved in murdering George Floyd, and that question being brought before a jury who came back remarkably fast with three guilty verdicts. And so I think it's great that this happened today. I think we should definitely use this as an example, but we also need to make sure that we don't use this as a means to, as a pacifier, to stop fighting for police accountability. We need to continue to fight for police reform, and we need to continue to make sure that bad police are off of the police force. And I think we saw that today. Now, what's really interesting is even though the jurors came back with the unanimous three guilty verdicts, it's going to be really, really important for everyone to see exactly what he is sentenced to. I think unquestionably he should be sentenced to the maximum sentence that is allowed by law. I think legally, because there was a 9-year-old girl who unfortunately had to witness this horrendous, cruel, despicable act, that is a mitigating factor that can be used to even go beyond the maximum sentence. And so I'm hopeful that the sentencing is done correctly, that he gets the maximum that he frankly deserves according to the laws in Minnesota.
Joseph Mensah. I got Mensah on the brain, quite honestly, without being facetious or gratuitous. 3 people in 5 years gets a $100,000 plus buyout of his contract and a new job, and the former police chief quits. Their illegal wiretaps and witness tampering and informants and almost like a COINTELPRO in Wauwatosa, and he's not charged with anything. And the evidence on Mensah, who just so happens to be black, with Alvin Cole is overwhelming.
Right.
It is the same. I mean, it is just as compelling, just as heinous, and he gets a buyout and a new job. How does that fit in in the narrative of what happened today?
Well, I think that as people in the society, we need to keep in mind that even though that we are people of color, we are African Americans, and we may be a domestic minority, we are a global majority. And it's important that we use our power within the legal system to find cops accountable. Now, as it relates to Joseph Mensah, what we are doing is we are using a very unused law in the state of Wisconsin, which is essentially a John Doe proceeding, which basically under Wisconsin statute 968.02, which basically says that if a prosecutor refuses or is unable to charge somebody with a crime, that the court on their own motion may find probable cause to charge somebody with a criminal offense. So on behalf of the Jay Anderson Jr. family, who was killed by Joseph Mensah on June 23rd, 2016, we've actually petitioned the court to charge Joseph Mensah with regards with for a homicide, essentially. And so we've been presenting before the courts expert witness testimonies. We have been presenting before the court different, character witnesses and things like that to try to prove to the court that there is probable cause to charge him with an offense. And I found that this law, which is essentially a John Doe hearing, is a law that exists in many states in this country. It's widely unused, but this is something that we as citizens of this country can use to try to hold police accountable. It doesn't always have to be because someone died. If a law enforcement officer is lying on police reports, which I have seen often, we need to go to court and see if the courts agree that they should be charged with obstruction of justice. Obviously, if a police officer like Joseph Mensah is killing people without any accountability, and I believe he did it without the legal protections that is granted to him as an officer, then we need to demand of the court to look at the evidence and to try to push them to charge officers with a crime. As much as we want police reform, it's also extremely important that we have prosecutorial reform. We have seen so many times where police officers are not charged because prosecutors, time and time again, excuse the behavior. And even though prosecutors may not be the ones that are pulling the trigger, they certainly are helping to put the bullets in the gun. And so we need to make sure that they are held accountable. And if prosecutors aren't willing to do their jobs, then we as citizens need to file these complaints with the courts to push the courts to charge people with offenses, particularly with bad officers.
But now we have a triangle. We have Joseph Mensah in Wauwatosa, Jacob Blake in Kenosha, and Kyle Rittenhouse. So we have Jacob Blake being shot several times in the back, allegedly had a knife, allegedly was confrontational with the police. The prosecutor spends several hours in closing arguments, dismissing the case. You have Kyle Rittenhouse that raises over $2 million, comes up missing while he's on bail. The judge doesn't revoke his bail because he's in clear violation of the bail, but gives him almost carte blanche for no apparent reason, right? And yet, Jacob Blake Jr. will never walk again. Will never walk again. And seemingly, you have to question how the police got there in the first place. All right, but you have these special circumstances for Kyle Rittenhouse, who is seen as a hero by ultra-right, Proud Boy, evangelicals who have helped raise money. The My Pillow guy helps raise money for him, and Kim. At the same time, you have Jacob Blake, who has been demonized and seen as if he had to do something to deserve this. Help people to understand that triangle. That in essence, what happened to George Floyd and what happened to Daunte Wright is systematic. It is not; these are not isolated incidents. It is the worst occurrence to have Daunte Wright happen in the midst of George Floyd's trial. You can all but think that her lawyers, that officer, is now talking to prosecutors. You would like to think, can I get a deal? I need a deal. I need a deal by Friday. Okay, because it's obvious I'm going down, right?
Right.
The opposite could be just as true, that she could very well feel, and I think I would hope as a lawyer you would explain why Chauvin chose in the sentencing phase, because we experienced it in Laquan McDonald. The Laquan McDonald trial went before a jury, but his co-conspirators went before a police-friendly judge, and they were clearly in violation of obstruction of justice and all of this. But everyone knew that this judge from the beginning was going to rule on behalf of those police officers. And Van Dyke is in jail and they are free because he chose another method. And I think it was the Blakely rule in Minnesota where Chauvin chose to, if in the event of sentencing, he would rather go before the judge than he would go before the jury. Help us to understand those nuances, because as a lawyer, we see Judge Mathis on TV and these other judges, and we come across like we lawyers, but you guys really know the nuances of this and how people can play the system, as egregious as it is. If you're white with money, law enforcement got connections, you can make some things happen if you don't, if juxtaposed to somebody who is black or brown, without money, without resources, and without name or notoriety.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, it's a very unfair and unequal system. That's quite obvious. And Wisconsin is abhorrent in sort of that triangle, as you suggest, with regards to what happened with Officer Joseph Mensah, where he is an officer that killed 3 people within 5 years. 5 years as a law enforcement officer, period. He shot 19 shots within a 5-year time period. And once he quit the job with Wauwatosa, he was actually hired as a deputy sheriff in the county next door to Milwaukee County. With Kenosha, we have a community, frankly, that I think many people were very sympathetic, unfortunately, to Kyle Rittenhouse. I actually represent 2 of the victims whom Kyle Rittenhouse injured. One person was Gage Grosskreutz, who was seriously injured, and also represent the estate of Joseph Rosenbaum, who was the first person that Kyle Rittenhouse killed after the Jacob Blake shooting. And then we have, as you said, Jacob Blake, who unfortunately was shot in the back, and that officer just the other day is now back on the force with basically no consequences. And so we've seen time and time again with the system, if you're a certain color, if you're white, you get so many allowances, as I believe that Kyle Rittenhouse has gotten with what's happening in court in Kenosha. Like you said, he's clearly violated terms of his bail, but there has been literally no consequences to that. And that's because, there are rules within the system that are available, that are supposed to be equally available to everybody. But unfortunately, we don't see that those rules are equally applied to everybody. And so, we need to, really make sure that if we see judges that are not, we believe that there's some ethics issue. Like there's this judge in Denver, Colorado, who was using the N-word, who was disparaging to Black Lives Matter, and she was just actually censured and kicked off the bench. I believe I read it today. And so keep in mind that all judges are licensed, all prosecutors are licensed. I'm a licensed attorney. And if you see that people are behaving unethically, we are required to act ethically. And people need to complain more against judges, against prosecutors, when they're not doing their basic job. And unfortunately, we don't see enough of that. They get so many passes because they have, that black robe on, or because they're a prosecutor, and we need to use the tools that are available to us. And frankly, that's what Derek Chauvin is using. He's using the tools that are, frankly, available to everybody. It's just that he understands the tools that are in the toolbox more than most people do.
Kim Motley, attorney Kim Motley, look her up on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Periscope is dead. Reverend Cameron Barnes is our national youth director for the Rainbow Push Coalition, represents hundreds and hundreds of millennial college students, high school students. We watched the verdict today, Cameron. Give me your take on the verdict and the victory.
Well, of course, thank you again for having me, Bishop Grant, and certainly give honor to the other esteemed guests I'm honored to share this platform with. You know, I watched the verdict and wasn't so surprised. I felt like, and I had told many of my peers this who kind of looked and asked me because they feel like I'm kind of in the movement. They thought, Cameron, well, what do you think is going to happen? And I told them there were too many eyes on this case all around the world. They didn't have a choice but to convict him. First of all, because it was blatantly illegal. It was blatantly done broad daylight. We thank Darnella Frazier for being brave. She was taking her little cousin to the store to grab snacks and happened to pull her phone out and record what she saw that then shook the world, not the nation, the world. And so, I told them before, I said, there's not any kind of other verdict we can have because other than that, they would burn America down to the ground tonight. And so I wasn't too surprised, but you know what, Bishop? I said this on my social media that I was excited. I had my 2 minutes of excitement and relief, but the work still continues. I still couldn't help but think about Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Eric Garner and Sandra Bland and Tamir Rice and Mike Brown, Philando Castile. You know, the list goes on and on and on. I about what they to go through, what those families are still having to go through. It's a bittersweet day. I mean, I'm grateful for the relief, but I'm very aware of the work.
Well, I appreciate the work that you do. Pastor Kim Pullings is from Jacksonville, Florida. She's under occupation. There's a mini Trump in Tallahassee that is leading the charge. If you don't know, in 47 state legislative bodies, there's over 300 pieces of legislation to suppress voting, to move polling places, to marginalize early voting, to make it criminal, to give aid to voters who are standing in line, to have to show multiple pieces of identification. They may even have make you take a blood test and bring your COVID vaccine card along with it. We've not seen this kind of move in 47 states. In 47 states. And when we talk about the George Floyd Justice Bill, when we talk about HB1, significant to this fight are people who are at ground zero. Kim, I know you watched the verdict and you know about the victory. Give me your take on from Jacksonville, Florida.
Well, immediately when they decided to go live with the verdict, I wind up going live as well. And for me, and first of all, let me say this, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be here. I thank God for each and every person that's here on the panel. But for me, it's very emotional. As a mom of six, and residing here in Jacksonville for almost 13 years, it has been a wait for the past year and almost 2 years, as you know, Bishop, because you've been coming back and forth to Jacksonville as well. So a lot of what we've been dealing with here and how I took that verdict, one, I was ecstatic because I was totally afraid. Well, I shouldn't say afraid. I just knew that had that verdict come back differently, the conversation that we would be having now would be out on the streets and we would be preparing for what was next. And for Jacksonville and Florida, what that looks like is if 4 people gather together and they walk outside and they began to start a peaceful protest without a permit, they're committing a felony here in Jacksonville, Florida. If 25 people come together and do a peaceful protest, they are now committing a second-degree felony here in Jacksonville without the opportunity for bail being reached that night. So they basically want to hold you in jail. They want to keep you there. They want to disenfranchise our children. And we've been put in a place where we have a governor who's looking to run for president with that former president. And there's a problem here because he is essentially creating new Jim Crow laws here in Jacksonville, Florida, and they're getting pushed through without any type of pushback with any, besides, the Democratic Party. But as far as on the Republican side, they're all for it. They don't look at the weight and the amount of taxpayers' dollars that are going towards these verdicts that are coming back, where they're saying, hey, what you're doing is illegal. You're violating people's civil rights. You're violating the law by either arresting them for things that they haven't done, by murdering them in the street for crimes they didn't commit. They're unarmed. There's just so many different things. And when he had the opportunity to actually look at police reform, no, he just doubled down on the bill. He doubled down on the Police Bill of Rights. He doubled down on enforcing and helping law enforcement officers that are doing wrong. And the thing is, we're not looking for laws that harm good officers. We're looking for laws that are willing to stop indemnifying officers that are doing wrong. Stop.
Now, Kim, you've spent time with Diamonds Ford.
Yes.
And many people don't know Attorney Motley, Marissa Alexander. But they placed a $500,000 bail on Kim and just as much money on her fiance. And she had the right to carry, license to carry, no knock warrant. She had no idea who it was talking to the police on the phone in her bathroom. Called the police on herself, as they want to say. Police at the wrong address looking for the wrong person. And Diamonds Ford is free, but she's still facing these charges. Absolutely. And so the verdict today, one can only imagine, and Bishop Victor Woods is going to be coming to us just momentarily from Indianapolis. One can only but imagine, for those of you who are watching, I hope you would text, tell, and tag somebody to join this platform. One can only imagine, had George Floyd lived, what charges he would have faced. How he would have been incarcerated, how he would have been vilified, how he may be doing time in Minnesota State Corrections Facility. Again, I think it's important to understand the nature of the verdict and the nuances of the verdict and what kind of victory this is. Kim, talk about Diamonds Ford, because we were there. You've spent time with her. This young mother, by the way, has had her entire life turned upside down simply because, and it goes to what Attorney Motley talked about, the unethical behavior of police officers. The same was the case with Breonna Taylor. Had only God saved Diamonds Ford. Breonna Taylor lost her life, but the same way, shot into the apartment, but broke up in the apartment, and arrest her for their bad acts. Give our viewers some context as it relates to that, because people don't know there are George Floyds that are not men, they're women too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the story with Diamond Ford was she was sleeping in her bed at around 8 o'clock in the morning. JSO, Jacksonville Sheriff Police officers, enacted, or they went to enact a search warrant against the house looking for a particular person. Once they got there, they broke into the windows. She thought that she was being robbed because she does not live in a neighborhood that's that's without crime. So, but she has she had a weapon in her home, which is legal. You're allowed to have a weapon in your home in Florida. We have a castle doctrine, and we also have we have the stand your ground law here. So she has those two laws protecting her, but because it was the police on the other side and she shot at them, she called 911. And when she recognized that it was, she was like, wait a minute, hold on. When you listen to the 911 tape,
she shot blindly at them. She had no real idea at the time
she didn't
whether
know
it was police or anybody. She
exactly.
shot blindly. An officer got hit in the vest.
Right. Exactly.
Was taken to the hospital for a couple of hours.
Absolutely.
Was released.
Right.
And Diamond was charged with some type of
3 counts of attempted murder of a
okay.
police officer, of a law enforcement officer.
There was no attempt at murder. It was a blind shot, having
Right.
no
Exactly.
idea, but she had the right to protect herself
Absolutely.
on the castle and understand your ground.
Understand your ground, and under the castle doctor, she has a right to protect herself in her home if she feels that she is being attacked. So, so she spent approximately 120 days, I want to say, inside the Jacksonville County Jail, where she had Dignity Power and a couple of other organizations that raised her bail, which was about $500,000 in
Cash.
Cash.
They wouldn't take American Express black card.
It was a cash bail, yeah. So, and then on top of that, Anthony Gant just was released last weekend, about 2 weekends ago, on a $350,000 bail as well. So, so almost $1 million to allow them to get their freedom back. And she was a mother. She has a mother of a teenage daughter. She's living in fear because now she's in a position where people are looking at her as if she attempted to kill officers, and that wasn't the case. She doesn't live her life in that way, as I know it. And, she has been living as a American citizen that's been following the law, doing the right thing. So my thing is, how do we get there to a place where we can just indiscriminately go into people's houses and just shoot them, beat them up, do whatever we're doing without taking into consideration that we have multiple times where we've seen that this has occurred. So Jacksonville is no different, but the only difference, she could have been Breonna Taylor, another Breonna Taylor. She's a hashtag, but hers is Justice for Diamonds Ford is her hashtag, but she's alive to tell her side of the story. So we're looking forward to her day in court. We're looking forward to seeing what we've been asking Melissa, our state attorney, to drop the charges, and she's kind of doubled down on it. And that's usually what happens here in Jacksonville, Florida. Instead of them doing what's right, they double down, or they create more laws or additional laws to decriminalize, disenfranchise our community. So that's really
whether it's Alvin Cole in Wauwatosa, or Diamonds Ford, or Devon Gregory in Jacksonville. For those of you who are watching, go and look these persons up and give them your support. The verdict and the victory doesn't stop in Minneapolis, and it's so critical. I wanted you to really get a snapshot of what's really happening around the country. Bishop Victor T. Woods pastors the New Unity Church in Indianapolis. This past week, 8 people were killed at a FedEx site. A very tragic. There have been more mass shootings in the Indianapolis area this year alone, 50 nationally, but Indianapolis has had the most. Late last year, Deshaun Reed was murdered under suspicious circumstances, like a George Floyd, like an Alvin Cole, and I'm hoping that you get a real scope of from these snapshots, whether it be Florida, whether it be Wisconsin, whether it be Indianapolis and the state of Indiana and other places around the country, the unique nuances of what happened in Minnesota are not easily to transpose in another state with other laws and what have you. But it's important that you understand the verdict and the victory and how we might get the victory in other situations. Bishop Victor Woods, talk to us about the impact of this verdict on you and the community that you serve there in Indianapolis. And thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir, Bishop. Thank you for having me, and grace and peace and blessings to all the other panelists that are joining on this call. To be honest with you, Bishop, it has been a thought-provoking space for the people here in Indianapolis, because not only due to what has occurred in Minneapolis, but also the mass shooting that happened here in Indianapolis. As it relates to the verdict, there are many people that are elated that the guilty verdict was passed. I was listening to the news before my service tonight, and I was listening to one of the news commentators, and he made the statement that many people woke up this morning fearful to hope. That's what he said. Many people woke up this morning fearful to hope, which I could understand that to a sense because no one knew what was going to happen. Are we going to get justice, or are we back to square one? But to know how things played out, how things rolled out, you couldn't negate the fact that justice needed to be justice. And that's what I believe we received on today. I think as a Black community, I can't speak for anyone else, but Indianapolis, we are relieved. There is a sense of calmness right now, just for right now. But even in the sense of that calmness, maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning point of productivity for in the future. Only the Lord knows. But again, we stand together as a Black community and as a Black people. And so again, even with the verdict, it has been very soothing to know that George Floyd's family could get justice in such a time as this.
What's the mission of the church, Bishop, under these circumstances? Right now, we have not crossed these waters before. We have not we've not been in. Nat Turner said, Attorney Motley, there are pharaohs on both sides. There are pharaohs on this side. Pastor Pullins, when we get to the other side, it's pharaohs over there. There are pharaohs on both sides. I don't know about you, but for me, it took me a minute psychologically to grapple with, Cameron, that Attorney Blackwell was not speaking on behalf of the defendant. He was the prosecutor. That you know, I saw a Black prosecutor, a Black special prosecutor, and maybe Kim, in a moment, you can give us some insight from a lawyer's standpoint, the uniqueness of that, talking about a police officer as a defendant. So they would say Officer Chauvin, the defendant. And it took a minute to like take that in from a historical standpoint, because we have not seen that. We've not experienced that in living color that would be equal to watching George Floyd lose his life in just over 9 minutes. But Bishop, what would be the role of the church? Because it's our responsibility to speak truth to power. What should be our message in this real time, right in this Kairos moment? What should be our message?
Well, I believe, Bishop, one of the messages of the church should be to continuously show agape love, just not brotherly love, but agape love, showing that love between God and man. Also, I believe another mission of the church is to get out into the land, the territory, and engage with our police departments to see what we can do to bridge this gap that is so terribly distraughting between police and community. One thing I have to say, and many may not agree, but I have to say, all the cops, all the police officers aren't bad. We still have some good police officers, but yet we still need to weed out those who mean no good. That's just the reality of it. That's the transparency of it. But again, to answer your question, I believe one of the missions of the church is, one, to stand together, continue to stand together. Because not only has the church had to deal with how to operate in the midst of this pandemic. The church has had to deal with how to keep the people of God in a positive faith sense that God still reigns, God is still in control. Not only that, but then a third thing is, even as Indianapolis has now had to encounter this mass shooting that has hit home, what is the mission of the church now? Even as it relates to this shooting that has happened to us here in Indianapolis, that God is still in control. So I believe, again, the mission of the church is to stay positive, stay together, keep praying, but willing to work together to bring resolve to the issues that are at hand. One thing that's really been kind of frightening to some of us as believers is that how could two 19-year-olds lose their life? There was a 19-year-old that was only working at FedEx for about a couple of months, and then there was another 19-year-old that was only working at FedEx for about a week. And the one that was only working for about a week, she had just received her first paycheck. She had just received her first paycheck on the job. And so now she has lost her life. She is no longer here walking the earth. So what is the mission of the church? To continuously encourage the people that God still knows what he's doing. He will never fail, and he hasn't failed yet. But yet we have to be patient and let God do what he does. Of course, there's work on our end. Faith without works is dead. We get that. But we also have to be patient and let God do what he does, because I say this often, Bishop, and to the other guests, that if we say God bless America, then it's time for us to bless God. And in the midst of us blessing God, if we want God to bless America, we must do what we do, and then we have to let God does what he do. Because if we make our business his business, he'll make his business our business.
I like that. Pastor Kim, in his last segment, Bishop Woods touched on something. You've talked about how the pastors there in the Jacksonville, Gainesville area are not as engaged with the Black Lives Matter crowd and the young activists. And Cameron, what was interesting today is that Reverend Al Sharpton thanked the grandmamas and the granddaddies and the aunties for praying on their knees for a moment like this. But there is such a, there's such a significant role for this synergy of Black church, Black leaders with young activists. You've talked about it there in Jacksonville. You have crossed lines. Some of your colleagues there in Jacksonville have taken exception to your role, but you believe tough times don't last, tough people do, and you hung in there. Give us some perspective on that, because I think that's the next hurdle to overcome.
Well, let me say this. I think the difference is, for me, I spent 13 years in New York on patrol as a patrol officer, I'm a retired police sergeant, as a retired 9/11 first responder. My mindset was, when I showed up at that first protest once, and the protest was for George Floyd. It was one of the largest protests they've had here in the city of Jacksonville. Over 10,000 people showed up that they weren't even expecting. When we got there, it was our kids that were there. My children went out there. And as a parent, first, I said, I can't go out there and not be there with my children. And then once I got there and saw what was happening to our children, I could not leave them out there. So I've been with them from day one until today, and I'll be there until, God tells me something different. But one of the things that I've really been stressing is, we've been called to make disciples, right? And if Jesus was that example, then we need to be Jesus in the streets. It's okay to go back into our buildings. We know that we're transitioning back and we're doing all those things, but our children need us. They need us to step into a place now where they can see us, where they know that they have our support. Because let me say this, and I'm going to say it, some people may be upset. I don't know how many adults were out there in other cities, but I'm going to say this really loud. It was because of our youth. It was because of our young adults that we had this verdict, because that's one of the things we really have to understand. And they did it without the support of adults. They did it without the support of the church. They did it without the support of people. They did it because they did not want to go into their future with the same situation happening again. They're tired. So we need to find a way to come alongside of them and not necessarily stifle their voices and not change what they're speaking, but to come alongside and be hope in the streets, be a buffer between the police. These are the things that they grew up on. These are the things, the images that they saw during the civil rights movement. And we have to recognize we're not that many far generations from the civil rights movement. It's only been about 64 years or give a plus. So if that be the case, then we need to really think about that and learn how to go and truly make disciples and get out of our buildings. Stop looking down. Stop worrying about whether it's a Marxist system, whether it's it's a political statement. It is a human rights statement. Black lives matter, period. It's not about what we think, who we are voting for. It's about what is going on in the lives and the hearts of our children. These children are going through trauma every single day. And we're not out there to minister to that trauma. We're not out there to speak truth to power to them, to encourage them and empower them to do the things they really came to do, and which is to shut down discrimination in their lives, not only for their children, but their children to come and the children that are coming after them. We need to step out, and we need to step out in faith, and we need to put aside what we think and get alongside with these children and get out there and do what's right. And I'm not going to back down from that. And I'm not going to change from that. And they know it. They know who's out there with them. And they don't care if he wasn't out there before. Just come out. That's all they're looking for. They're looking for the leaders. They're looking for people. When you get out there, you'll see what you need to minister to, because God is there. He's moving. And let me say this, all those that came out there and said, hey, it's a COVID, it's all this stuff. I was out there for 1.5 years. Not one of us had gotten COVID. So you can tell me where God was really at. And I can tell you, God was with his children. He was with those children, whether they know him or don't know him. The only way they're going to find out who he is if we bring him to them. They're not coming in the church. We have to bring God to them. We have to be Jesus in the streets.
I knew that would hit a nerve with you. I just wanted to put you out there. Donna McGee says it's time to take a stand and don't stop moving. Regina Chandler wants to know, will Floyd's verdict increase racial tensions from where it is now? We got a couple of legal questions, Attorney Motley, I want you to ask momentarily. Cameron, I want you to chime in on this as we're coming into the last segment. I was overwhelmingly concerned about all of this reaction to boarding up buildings and the National Guard and the special ops and SWAT teams. I'm concerned about your group. Y'all are some violent people. At least the expectation is that you're violent, that y'all, if things didn't go your way, y'all are going to burn it down. You were in Quincy, Illinois, fighting for a young black student at Southern Illinois University, who was attacked in a bar, and the patron took the local prosecutor almost 2 weeks to file charges, and she was badly bruised and beaten, and there's no explanation for it other than they had issues with her sexuality, they had issues with her race, they had issues with her gender. And so I'm concerned about the messaging that comes out of this mischaracterization of millennials, young activists. The laws that Kim talked about are laws that are being enacted across the country that are trying to diminish the public right, the constitutional right to gather, to protest, to demonstrate, to act out in this experiment called democracy. How do you, as a young emerging leader, address that? Because this preconceived criminalization of young black and brown activists and young black and brown organizations, almost demonizing them, where you have a person that sits on the hill that says, I felt safer around the insurgents on January 6th than I did around leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement. So gratuitous and so very wrong. How do you address that, Cameron Barnes?
You know, Bishop, many times my peers have often told me we are not our ancestors, and I don't want it to make it seem like we are being criminalized and victimized and everything. But the fact is, we've seen what they can and will do because, as my sister said, we're tired. And we've often said before, we're not our ancestors. And we're a much bolder generation. We're a much more get in your face confrontational generation because we're more practical in a sense of we cannot deal with someone who forces their knee on our neck, metaphorically or physically. And so, but I tell my peers, as Reverend Jackson has done so and learned from Dr. King, we choose nonviolence, as he always says, not because we're scared, but because we're smart. And all of that goes on, I tell my peers, many times we get more things done at the negotiation table when we're strategic, when we are intentional, when we're not impulsive. We have to think smart if we're going to be a different generation of leaders. We've got to get ourselves to the table. We've got to make sure that we are respected, that we have the connotation that we deserve, that when we're brought to the table, we're not treated as barbaric animals. We're treated as the respectable human beings that we are to negotiate the rights of our future and of our generations. We're not going to let our kids go through what we went through, what our parents and grandparents went through. We're a much different generation. And so I let them know all the time that I understand you want to get something done, but if you really want to get something done, you need to get to the table, not outside and being barbaric and everything and impulsive without thinking. You've got to strategize in this nation if you are going to get something done.
Attorney Motley, as we close, I heard today a term that I'd never heard before, and you can give light to it because one of the questions has to do with police carrying liability insurance like lawyers, and that would be akin to qualified immunity. But I heard one of the commentators, who's a former police chief of Washington, D.C., say constitutional policing, that there needs to be constitutional policing, which simply means some of my members are watching, and I was driving somewhere recently, and there is a likelihood, this would be my case, Attorney Motley, if you had to represent me, there's a likelihood I may have been speeding. And the reason why there was a likelihood I may be speeding is because Bishop Woods, the state trooper, turned his lights on and I pulled over because I'm not admitting, I'm just saying there was a likelihood. I didn't have him to chase me. I politely pulled over. I pulled out my insurance card, Pastor Kim, pray my strength in the Lord. I pulled because she drives one of them souped up Dodge Chargers. Bishop Woods, you need to get to know her. It's got that Hemi engine in it that roars like a lion, and just right down the street waking people up. And she's addicted to speed like me. And I got pulled over, Attorney Motley, had my driver's license and everything. He went, because I put everything in his hand, seatbelt on there. First thing he said, I got it. The trooper said, I got it. All right. I was being real black and real constitutional about it. But the fact that I just pulled over and did what I had to do. He radioed my driver's license and all this kind of stuff and asked me where I was going. I told him where I was going. He gave me a little warning and let me go. I think it was the moment that he didn't want no episode with on his watch. And I looked a little pro-black. And so that may have helped him, say, let me hurry up and get out of this while I can. But what is constitutional policing and the whole idea of qualified immunity? Because it didn't work for Derek Chauvin. And it didn't work, and there are a number of reasons why it didn't work, right? But you as a lawyer can speak specifically to it, because I think people may walk away from the George Floyd thinking that you can apply it in Tennessee, it will work in Arkansas, it will work in Texas, and right now it may only work in Minnesota for a number of reasons, right? Speak to that as it relates to that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that what's really important is, constitutional policing is just another gimmicky term. Frankly, we have been gaslit as a public as to what qualified immunity is. And we need to understand that qualified immunity essentially is not being able to sue a police officer personally if they are doing their job and are acting within the confines of the law. Qualified immunity is only a barrier in civil matters. It is not a criminal defense. It is not something that absolves them of being criminally charged. And so the police unions across this country have sort of tried to, I think, have gaslit the public to make them believe that qualified immunity is something that bars them from being criminally charged, but that is simply not true. It's a lie. They have perpetuated that lie, and it's something that we need to understand that only works in regards to personal civil liability. And with regards to my experience in representing families, what they often want, rightfully, is they want an officer to be criminally charged, which has nothing to do with qualified immunity. And so I think whether or not, frankly, there should be constitutional policing now. It's just basically following the law, follow the Constitution. I'm very pleased to be on this panel, but I was really interested in what Pastor Pullings has been saying in terms of what's happening in Jacksonville, Florida, which is 1,000 times just completely illegal. That they're focusing on people that are constitutionally have a constitutional right to assemble. And what we need to know and understand as Black and brown people in this country, especially as African Americans, even though we represent about 13% of this population in this country, we are a domestic minority, but we are a global majority. We have seen this movie before, and we need to consolidate our power, not just within this country, but globally. There are things that we can do. If prosecutors are filing garbage charges on people who are defending themselves while they're in their homes and are using their legally registered weapons, then we can file motions against prosecutors for vindictive prosecution. And that is something that you can do with their licensing board. And if the board thinks it's appropriate, they can get their license taken away. And then they can't be a lawyer anywhere. And you can't be a prosecutor if you're not licensed to be a prosecutor. So we need to start sort of looking at creative ways of doing this en masse. I can say that at least in Wauwatosa and Kenosha, between November of last year and now, we have filed over 60 different lawsuits against the police departments in Wauwatosa and Kenosha. With regards to Wauwatosa, we've been able to get almost 10% of their police force have quit because we have been monstrous with the lawsuits. We have been monstrous with filing citizen complaints, which is part of the reason why pushed out Joseph Mensah from his job. And so we think that there are really a lot of creative things that we should do. But again, I can't stress enough that qualified immunity is not a criminal defense. That is not something, it doesn't exist in the criminal world. Qualified immunity cannot be used to absolve somebody of committing a crime. With police officers, they have the same criminal defenses that we all do. If they have the right to self-defense, things like that. We have the same exact defenses in criminal court. So I think that's really, really important to know.
Wow. Attorney Motley here in Chicago with Adam Taleo, State's Attorney Kim Foxx put a attorney as a prosecutor, assistant prosecutor in her office on leave because they went in front of the judge to get a warrant and to get charges on the 21-year-old that was with Adam because he mischaracterized and it was false. It was more than a mischaracterization. It was false. And had it not been how it was discovered is the Citizen Review Group, COPA, when they released the video, the video and all the evidence associated with the video fly in the face, juxtaposed to what he said in front of a judge, and it forced her unprecedentedly to come out and say he was wrong, and he shouldn't have said that. And the way she termed it was he was misinformed. He was misinformed. So how many prosecutors go in front of the judges who are quote unquote misinformed, who get wiretaps, who get warrants, search warrants, who get warrants for arrest and such, who were misinformed, but it's too late, Bishop, because they're already in custody and they don't have the resources. Their case is not visible. They didn't have a kilo of cocaine. They weren't a dope dealer. They weren't any of that. But the prosecutor goes in and gives the judge this picture. The judge buys it, writes the warrant, and it's too late. You don't have the sensational dynamic of shooting a 13-year-old who some believe didn't have a weapon. And so I think it's important. Go to www.bishoptavisgrant2.org. Hit us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and follow these persons that are on this platform. Tevis Kleiss asked the question, will they put him in some type of special confinement? The answer is yes. He's a police officer. He's an endangered species in any correctional facility anywhere in the country. Ask what has happened to Jason Van Dyke. They've had to move him out of the state on a couple of occasions because of threats on his life and his need for safety. Is there an answer for the division with the world today? I don't think there's ever been an answer except Jesus Christ. Part of our challenge, someone had asked the question about whether or not this will increase, Regina Chandler, will Floyd's verdict increase racial tension from where it is now? I think it is on the rise. And I think what Kim and others have articulated, it has not peaked. I think with vigilanteism, I think with the attempt in the United States Congress of a sitting Congress person wanting to start an organization that will hold true to Anglo-Saxon values. The founders of the Ku Klux Klan feel very vindicated today that they have now made it back into the United States Congress, on the floor of the Congress, and has a person that is now espousing their beliefs. I think what's so critical for us as people of color to understand the institutional dynamic of racism, that the murder of George Floyd and the trial of Derek Chauvin only gives us a glimpse at. It only gives us a glimpse. Many people don't know the backstory, and I'll do this, and I'll provide our panel a minute to close. When we became aware organizationally of the charges facing Derek Chauvin, the prosecutor of that county had lost the case of Philando Castile. He tried the lawyer, but he lost the case. And he was the lead prosecutor. And there was a great deal of angst in the Black and brown community about him being the lead prosecutor in that case. We met with Keith Ellison and insisted that this case had national implications. And the only way we could try to tamper or turn the temperature down on these fires that are being set around the country is that the attorney general, who's happened to be African American, must take this case over. There was no question about it. His integrity, his ability, and the opportunity juxtaposed with what we saw in Kentucky with a different type of African American attorney general who gave us a very skewed and a very upside down view of the legal system, because he is the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Kentucky. We left there with a commitment from Keith Ellison that he had heard us and that he would take seriously our ask of him and that we would see a result in 24 hours. By the time we landed in Chicago that evening, it had been announced that Keith Ellison had took over that case. Now, that's just one nuance that was a part of many, 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 many steps that got us to the verdict and the victory on today. It's not the same everywhere. And so I think you need to understand sometimes what has to happen all together, inside and outside, to make real change happen that is beneficial, not to just Black people, but to all people. So I want to start with our panel. Bishop Victor Woods, I want to give you each member a minute or so to give us a closing comment on the verdict and the victory, what this day means to you, what it should mean to others, and where do we go from here? Bishop Victor Woods.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bishop. A great day on today from what we've heard as it relates to the verdict and the victory. Great day for not only Black people, brown people, but just people that feel that injustice has went on for too long. And all I say is we have to stay strong. We have to stay powerful. We have to continue to love each other. And many may not agree, but I will say this. As it relates to our Black community, the fight is not against each other. The fight is against injustice. Let me say it one more time. The fight is not against each other. The Bible even asks the question, God said, are you your brother's keeper? And when that question is asked, I got to say, yes, I am. So the fight is not with my brother. The fight is not with my sister. The fight is against injustice. Thank you, Bishop.
Wow. Pastor Kimberly Pullins from Jacksonville, Florida, Live Church.
So the one thing that I'll say is that we need to get involved. We need to make sure that we recognize that this is just the beginning. The fight is not over. We have work to do. And our young people need us, and we need to stand alongside them, come alongside, not to muzzle, not to change what they have to say, but come alongside and find out how we can help. And I'll leave this one quote with you guys that our young people speak every single day. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. So we have nothing to lose but our chains. Let's work together. It's our duty to fight. So let's fight together.
Reverend Cameron Barnes, National Youth Director, Rainbow Push.
Well, Bishop, all I can say is this is one battle and a very long war. And so celebrate if you must, but be prepared to continue fighting. And like my sister, Pastor Pullen said, you need to get involved. And if you're saying, well, I can't march, I can't get out, I can't do this, well, then you need to join the Rainbow Push Coalition at www.rainbowpush.org. You need to support these organizations, support our young leaders, support our organizations that are out here on the front lines, and do your part. Whatever your part is, I promise you, it is necessary. We're still going full speed ahead.
Attorney Kim Motley, freedom fighter, agitator, organizer, internationally known, globally recognized. You get the last word.
Well, thank you for this conversation. I'm so happy to have been on this wonderful panel. I've learned something from everybody. I think it's important, like everyone has said, and I'll echo what's been said, is that we need to fight. We need to consolidate our power and use our power. If you see something, you need to say something. We need to hold police accountable, and we do need to protect our youth as well, because they are the ones that are really out there fighting on the front lines and are being attacked viciously. We need to show up in mass at court if there's problems. If you see police officers misbehaving, we need to put in citizen complaints against police officers. And for prosecutors who are failing to prosecute people, especially police officers for not doing their job, we need to make sure that we file complaints against them as well. And if they're filing bogus complaints or criminal charges against people, then we need to file vindictive prosecution motions against prosecutors. I mean, the whole theme of what everyone is saying is that we need to fight. And just like they say, we need to think outside the box. we need to fight as though there is no box, and we need to create our own box.
I like that. Fight as if there is no box. You know, Langston Hughes asked the question, why does democracy work for everybody but me? And today we had a sense that there is a possibility that democracy will work for us as we strive to create a more perfect union. I want to leave with you tonight. This is the verdict and the victory. And I want to thank all of you who joined, and those who posted questions, and those who tagged friends and told people about this very special edition on this historic day of the verdict and the victory on Derek Chauvin, guilty on all 3 counts. And what was so significant and so moving for me is in the closing arguments on yesterday, this is what was said, that George Floyd's heart was too big and Derek Chauvin's heart was too small. And part of our challenge today is to realize that it is the smallness of the heart, the smallness of the mind, and the smallness of the spirit that keeps racism alive, classism alive, genderism alive, where we don't realize that not only do Black lives matter, but LGBTQ lives matter, immigrants' lives matter, the poor, the unemployed, the uninsured, the underrepresented lives matter, people who are struggling with COVID-19 because they don't have access to health care, their lives matter. The working poor, people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to sustain a family. Children who are in foster care, over 200,000 Black and brown children are in foster care. Their lives matter. But it's the smallness of heart. What would have happened had there been the sense of not using aggressive tactics to pull a young Black man, a young Black father over, and rather than pulling your taser, you pull your service weapon, and now he's dead and a child is fatherless. The mother's heart is beyond broken and can never be repaired. The father is wondering, when will I ever see my son again? These are all challenges we face as we look at the verdict and the victory. But the question has to be, what kind of heart do you have? Do you have the big heart or the small heart? I tell you what kind of heart I got. My heart got a little bigger today. Got a lot better today, because I realized that tough times don't last, tough people do. And there's a tremendous opportunity for us when you feel the passion of a Pastor Kimberly Pullins, or the purpose of a Bishop Victor Woods, or a skilled practitioner like Attorney Kim Motley share with you, or the young pursuit of a Cameron Barnes, who is an emerging young leader in our nation with millennials and college students. You've all but got to get a sense that we've got a fighting chance, but the chance means nothing if we don't fight. So I urge you, as we look and we examine and we analyze and we come to a conclusion as it relates to the verdict and the victory, use this moment to let your heart get a little bigger and be willing to look at people with a small heart and invite them over to our side. I want you to know a big heart makes a big difference in a world just like this. You'll know if you got a big heart when you go out of your way to help somebody. You know if you got a big heart when you see the senseless killing of a child or an adult in one of the communities that we live, or you read about a story like a Devon Gregory or an Alvin Cole or Deshaun Reed, and it keeps you up, it wakes you up, it stays on your mind, and you have a sense that something has to be done because this is just not right. You'll know if you have a big heart as the Wright family lays to rest Dante on Thursday, and whether or not a tear or some sense of emotion will come on you as you hear them speak last words over his life. You'll know if your heart is getting bigger when you feel like going to a march or participating in a protest or contributing to one of these organizations like Rainbow Push that is doing work every day somewhere in this nation and around the world fighting for civil rights and human rights. I encourage you, I implore you, as it relates to the verdict and the victory, let your heart get a little bigger. And let's make this world a little bit better. This is your host, Bishop Tavis Grant. I want to thank you for being a part of this platform. Go to all of these persons' platforms, follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget, tough times don't last, tough people do. I'll see you again. Thank you, and God be with you. Good night. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.